Welcome to this podcast. It's making me thirsty, the number one destination for Seinfeld fans. This is episode 141. You know, today's guests from Spaceballs, number 3, Normandy Lane, Cheers, Sports Night, Desperate Housewives, Supergirl, Curb Your Enthusiasm, 13 Reasons Why. And of course, she played Sue Ellen Mischke in 4 Seinfeld episodes. Please welcome Brenda Strong. Brenda, thanks for joining.
It's my pleasure, guys. Thanks for having me. Sorry it took so long for me to get here.
Nah, all good. You are worth the wait. And I kind of feel like Jerry in the bottle deposits when he says hi to Sue Ellen. I'm like, hi, Brenda. You know, it's such a treat to have you here. Obviously, Sue Ellen Mischke, I mean, what a role. I mean, so take us back. It's been 26 years, believe it or not, since The Caddy, aired on NBC. So January of 96.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about, was there an audition process? How'd the role come about for you for Sue Ellen?
It's interesting because Seinfeld had been going on for quite some time before Sue Ellen arrived. So there were several years of these incredible episodes. And my management at the time kept getting calls for me to go in on certain roles. And they said, because the show is so special, we really want whatever you go in on to be an outstanding role, like something that people will remember, because this is a water cooler show. Everybody in the industry watches it. And so we want to really make sure you stand out. So long story short, I got the audition for Sue Ellen. And of course, when you hear this person is the braless wonder, you start to have some hesitation on how it's going to be presented. So during the audition, I did go in and audition, and I wore my favorite jacket with kind of a sexy styled top underneath. And after I auditioned, they said, "Do you have any questions?" And I said, "So, can you just kind of give me an idea of what the tone of this is going to be? Because obviously, I just want to make sure that I represent myself well, and that, and both Jerry and Larry said, "Oh, no. This woman is an heiress. She is all class. There's no gratuitousness about this. This is all about her having a one-up on Julia Louis-Dreyfus." And I said, "Great." And I said, "By the way, how tall is she? Because, you guys haven't met me in person, but I'm nearly 6 feet tall." And I said, "Does she come up to about like here?" And you should have seen their eyes, because their eyes got really big, and they realized the visual gag of having Julia breast height for Sue Ellen was just too much to miss. So I think that kind of sealed the deal for that first episode.
And it's exactly right. We're watching it again yesterday, all 4 of your episodes. Every time you are talking to Julia lined up, it's that gag of you like towering over her. Especially the high school scene, which we're kind of jumping around a little bit, but I love that scene when she first kind of talks about you and brings you up at the high school or college party it was, and you're it's a few years later, and you come walking by and kind of take the boy from her. That's a fun little scene of kind of a flashback from into the 70s style, which I don't know, braless wonder, that was kind of the 70s style right back then. I mean, that kind of fits the
women's liberation, right? Everyone was burning their bras, and Sue Ellen was right there with all of the other women doing it. But I think the thing that was so funny about that flashback, because it was a flashback to the 1970s, mid 1970s, and both Julie and I, being about the same age, all of a sudden when we had to try on these 1970s clothes, we both got so much angst from having to try on these clothes that didn't fit either one of our bodies well. Like, she felt like she was kind of shorter and a little heavier. Obviously, she's not heavy at all. But in her mind, she felt like she was heavier in high school and didn't like the style of the jeans. And I conversely hated high waters. And so we both came out of that costume fitting for that particular scene really upset. And then we looked at each other and went, "Oh, we're just like being thrown back to our teenage years where we had body dysmorphia and hated ourselves." So it was pretty funny. But yeah, that set the tone. I stole her boyfriend because I wasn't wearing a bra. And then the vendetta lasted.
Yeah. So the first time we meet Sue Ellen is on the street, right?
Uh-huh.
You're walking down the street in that sweater, and I read that Larry David did he handpick that sweater? Like that he did.
Yeah, no, Larry literally had his fingerprints. I don't mean to put it that way. It was a bad choice of physical action. His fingerprints on everything that happened on that show, including costuming. And I think it was really important to him, based on our conversation, that the sweater be tasteful and not too see-through or too clingy. He wanted it to be something that looked like somebody would be wearing down the street, but it was just the movement that caught her eye, kind of thing. And we had gone through sweater after sweater after sweater in the wardrobe fitting, and Larry had to get back to set. And so there was one more. It was a cable knit sweater, that blue one, bluish gray that you see in the show, that the costumer put on me. And I said, Larry, I'll walk with you. So, because I wanted to wear that sweater. I like that sweater. So he used to ride his bicycle to and from the stages to the set of the New York street set. And so I decided it would be great if I just walked backwards, because then he could ride his bike and I wouldn't deter him from getting to set on time. So I'm kind of walking backwards, and his bicycle was just wobbling to and from. And he finally said, it's fine. That's the one. So that's how that sweater was chosen.
Oh man. And what a great, that's just a great scene. Like you said, the sweater fits perfect. The, later on you're wearing the sweater in the courtroom scene in the same episode.
Different sweater though.
Yeah, different sweater, a sweater, and then the whole does it fit, the play off the OJ trial. We talked to the writers of that episode, Greg Cavett and Andy Robb, and it sounded like Jerry and Larry were like kind of infatuated with the OJ trial, as much of us were at the time. That was an awesome scene too with Jerry. I love her free spirit or freewheeling spirit. He's on the stand and everything, and you got Jackie Childs there. That just seemed like a lot of fun just to kind of play off that with working with Jerry was very not childlike but playful in this episode. When you go to Kramer's apartment, he gets lets you inside, he's all excited, you can wait with me. And then in the courtroom scene, just kind of talking about working with Jerry from an acting standpoint, and kind of those scenes you were in with him, and what that was kind of like outside of him kind of also running the show with Larry, but just acting with Jerry in some of those scenes.
I have to say overall, and obviously Jerry being number one on the call sheet set the tone for everyone else. They were the hardest working comedic actors I've ever worked with. And a lot of it was they just took their jobs very seriously. They wanted the show to be good. They weren't resting on their laurels. The writing had to be, just so. And they were constantly looking for the funny. And I think the thing that I really admired about Jerry is, it's hard being a showrunner. And obviously, Larry took a lot of that burden on himself in the writer's room, but Jerry was very involved with all of that. And I do think there was a childlike essence about him in that scene in particular. I'm glad you picked up on that, because it was like he was on the stand and he realized he couldn't lie. So he just had to go, yeah, I love the way she's, just free and out there. And the fact that it just kind of bubbled out of him in that childlike little boy way of confessing, was so great. Because he wanted to also do right by his friend, but he couldn't lie. And, and the writers really kind of rode that thin line between parody and truth-telling, and the fact that it's ridiculous that I'm trying on this bra and expecting it to fit, just as ridiculous as it was that OJ should try on a glove and expect it to fit under those circumstances. I mean, it was pointing out the irony and the kind of the ludicrousness of the court system, and at the same time making a meal out of the relationships. And so I just thought it was a brilliant episode, and I was so happy to be a part of it. And then to be brought back, in later episodes, the bottle deposit, the whole JFK one-upmanship of trying to...
Sue Ellen. Brenda, when did you know, right? Did you know right away, like when you first auditioned, you were going to have multiple parts, or was it...
No,
you found out later
it was
about the
single guest star. I think that's the beauty of being a guest star, is you go in, you do your best, and you release it. you think whatever is going to happen happens. Sometimes in advance they book you for a recurring because they already know this is how we're going to develop this storyline. I was also doing Party of Five at the same time, so I knew I had 6 episodes of Party of Five, so I knew I could develop this character over time. Sue Ellen and I just came in for a one-off. And I think because they loved the dynamic so much, and the fact that nobody got one up on Elaine ever, and Sue Ellen did, it just added a whole nother color for Julia to play with her character. Because, she's really savvy and really smart and is always, coming back and landing on her feet. And Sue Ellen just put her off. So
yeah, that's a great point. You were to Elaine sort of like what Newman was to Jerry, like that nemesis, right?
Yes. Yeah. And you know what's funny is in the show they actually say, oh, she's your Lex Luthor.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
They call Sue Ellen Elaine's Lex Luthor. And then I go on, cut to 15 years later, I'm playing Lillian Luthor on Supergirl.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's right.
I mean, it's almost like the universe is just making a joke. I mean, it's just like, let's give you this because this makes.
So it's funny you mentioned obviously they brought you back and you were considered, and I just doing some research on you. I was just curious, the chaperone episode with the Miss America. Knowing that you were Miss Arizona, I always wondered if they thought you were going to be in that episode as kind of the contestants, if you remember that episode.
I wasn't up for that episode, so I don't really, it wasn't in my memory bank. I do know that we didn't want to be one of Jerry's girlfriends.
Ah, yeah. Well, listen, they got it. Hirschfeld, he gets it right.
Yeah.
And boy, yeah, being the Nemesis was great.
Yeah. Mark was really gifted, and Mark Hirschfeld at casting. And luckily my managers kind of just had their finger on the pulse of the characters as they were coming up and were thinking, okay, let's go for this one. And the fact that I ended up getting it was a miracle because there were some comedic geniuses that I auditioned against. I think Wendy Malick might have auditioned for that role as well. And she would have been amazing. And went on to a very strong comedic career after that. So, that show was really known more than anything for having guest stars on that went on to have these incredible careers. Yeah. Because we were all young. I was a new mom at the time. And I remember one of the things that I loved about being the Braless Wonder is I was nursing my son. During that time, I actually asked Larry, I said, I know this is going to sound weird, but what size would you like? Because I can actually control that, because I'm nursing. If you want my breasts to be bigger for this particular episode, I can do that. And then he was like, they're fine. They're fine. And then the irony is, as the episodes went on, I was weaning my son. So my breasts completely disappeared. So the Braless Wonder started wearing more and more clothes. You'll notice by the last episode, I have a coat on and all sorts of things because the gag was gone.
Yeah, and that's a really great story. The bile deposit too. That was an hour long episode. A lot going on there. You mentioned the clubs and everything like that, and it really does show. That's probably the highlight of that Nemesis you were talking about with Elaine. Just kind of the class that you were talking about earlier too. That character had. You were so classy with the with the thing at the auction, but. At this point now, you're back for your second episode. How was it with the rest of the crew? Right, most of your scenes were with Jerry and Julia, but curious at this point now you're on. For maybe if you want to talk about the next 2 episodes as well, but just kind of the camaraderie of that set. We've heard a lot about how welcoming both Michael Richards and Jason Alexander are. I know a lot of your scenes weren't with them, but I'm sure you had some stories or at least some interactions with them on and off set. Maybe you could touch on a little bit of those 2 guys as well, because I know you weren't in many scenes with them, but yeah.
Well, interestingly enough, when I came on as a guest star of the first episode, I had already worked with John O'Hurley, and John was in that episode. So John and I had done a series together, a short-lived series for Warner Brothers called Scorch, where we were these kind of egocentrical newscasters. And
with the dragon. The dragon.
Yes, with the dragon, exactly. The talking dragon, the puppet. Yeah. So we already had a shorthand. And so he basically said to everybody, she's great. You need to welcome her. And of course, everyone loved John. And so the red carpet just rolled out for me as well. And so I felt immediately at home. And Jason leaned down and kind of touched my script and said, you brave, brave woman, and ended up writing that very same thing on my script. So I have a signed autograph copy with all of their signatures on it. And they were all very kind. Michael was hysterical. And Michael and I ended up, I don't know if you know this, but I also was a yoga teacher at the time. And I had my own yoga studio. But Michael and I used to practice at the same studio. So we would see each other occasionally in yoga class. And after I had done Seinfeld, he had his own show, The Michael Richards Show. And he brought me on to guest star on that. So they were very generous with me. And later on, I ended up working with Jason during a charity fundraiser in New York for my charity that I was the national spokesperson of for the American Fertility Association. And he came on to receive an award from the association. He and his wife had some fertility struggles before they had children. And so we were able to reconnect at that time. And he had made it very public that he went through that with his wife. So I don't feel bad sharing it. I think the more people we talk about who have had difficulty, take the onus off of others of kind of the difficulty of it. But they were wonderful and welcoming and supportive. And again, going back to, they just wanted it to be good. They just wanted it to be funny. And so if you were in the soup with them, you were a player. They appreciated you.
Right. So season 7, that's when you joined, and we all know that was Larry's last year on Seinfeld. And we'll skip back and forth here, but your appearance on Curb with Larry, I mean, really memorable as well. What did you take from kind of or talk a little bit about the Curb experience? I mean, you kind of were all over that show, obviously dating Larry as the nurse. I mean, doctor, you made him wait, in the waiting room.
Dr. Flom.
Yeah.
Doctor, sorry, doctor. I got
so
Spaceballs
good. That
on my
episode
mind.
is so good. Like Chris said, everything is like you're a doctor, even on the date at your house. And
I've got the tank, the aquarium tank in my living room. My secretary is checking him in. I've got one of those huge scales in my bedroom. But that's the genius of Larry. He takes something very normal and he points out how ridiculous it is and how, we just assume these things are okay. And then he goes, no, wait a minute, this is weird. Like, people take their jobs really seriously, and how are they at home? And can we explore that? And he's a hypochondriac in Curb. And so how can you take that into the dating experience? And where is the line too far when you want advice, but you are also dating the person, So I think his genius is finding a deeper dive into what's normal for all of us and going, this is kind of crazy. This is ridiculous. And then we get to laugh at ourselves because then we see ourselves in our own neuroses and all of that.
Yeah. And 4 episodes you were in of Seinfeld, which there aren't any besides the parents who we kind of consider almost main characters, and Susan, who was George's fiance. You were the most episodes for a female, we believe. So that's an interesting, they saw enough in that character, like you said, to kind of have that arc, very, and then by the end you're friends with Elaine and she's your maid of honor, the betrayal, which is something else too, right? The whole backwards episode. Such a memorable episode.
How creative that was.
Yeah, that must have been something, a trip to shoot. Was it shot? Is any different for you as an actress, the way that was shot, or that's all editing, or what was the experience like shooting that backwards one?
It was all editing from what I recall. I don't know if that's such a good question. I don't know if we started at the back and went to the front, if that's how the script read, or if they just edited it out of order. Either way, it was a genius idea, in my opinion. And that episode in particular, God, you learn so much by watching people work. And I watched Julia walk up to the area where we were getting married and all the pillows were on the ground. And instead of just sitting on the pillow, she made a meal out of falling off the pillow, trying to sit on the pillow, not being able to be comfortable. And I thought, this is why she gets the big bucks. She looks for the opportunity. How can I make something out of this? Is there a funny here? And it wasn't in the script. That was just behavior that she was deciding to have. And so that episode was particularly fun because we got to wear the saris and, the bindies. And I have great pictures on my phone of us backstage looking very stoic, standing side by side in our saris.
Yeah, that was the most elaborate of any Seinfeld episode, I think, with the costumes, like you just mentioned, and all the costumes and so many extras. Elephants. And yeah, it was just it was wild. So that wasn't shot in front of the audience, I'm guessing, most of that, or was it?
Some of it was, some of it wasn't.
Yeah.
Some of it was, and some of it wasn't. I remember being kind of in the alleyway between the stages at one point for it.
So that episode, that was season 9, and the abstinence, which we sort of, I don't think we've even touched on yet, but your third episode was season 8. As Chris mentioned, Larry left after 7, so you were there for 2 episodes with Larry, 2 episodes without Larry. Any difference that you could tell on set? We've talked to a lot of different crew, cast, writers, and it sounds like Jerry had some other writers to kind of lean on for that show running role because he had so much going on without Larry there. Obviously Andy Ackerman is still directing, so there's still that. But was there a difference that you could tell that was on set without Larry there, kind of running the show? Like, what did you take out of that? Just being there for.
What have you heard?
We've actually heard there was maybe 2 different camps that sort of helped out Jerry in that respect. The old guard like Peter Melman or even Andy Robin and those types, and then kind of the newer writers that had come on later, like Mandel or Alec Berg. These types were kind of helping out Jerry in that producing role.
Yeah, being that, like any good parents, you tend to hide any disagreements from your children. And I think ultimately they had a united front in front of all of us who weren't regulars. I think if you talk to people who were kind of more there on a regular basis, they may have a different point of view. But as far as my work goes, my work wasn't affected at all by the change, except for the fact that Larry has a special, Larry really had his hands on the tone. Even in the first episode, that comment when Elaine says, "Sue Ellen, it's not a top, it's a bra." And I just say the words, "I know." Larry really, because I was like, "I know," and he's like, no, simpler, just, "I know, just clean." And so, I think if anything, maybe it was just that he had a particular vision for what he thought would be good, and he held true to that. And then when different voices come in, different writers come in, their particular take on what's funny may be a little broader, a little less broad, or a little more joke oriented rather than life circumstance oriented. So, I go with the flow. That's one of the things I've learned in my life is show up, do the best work you can, don't make a mess, take care of the people around you, make them look good, and walk away without any drama. That's like my MO. And so I try not to create drama unless it's being called for in front of the camera. I don't try to create any behind the scenes. And I think that leads to a long and very fruitful career. And I've been blessed by that. And obviously Julia and Mandel ended up forming Veep, and what an amazing legacy they left for us. Yeah. That was a brilliant show. So clearly, funny is funny, and it just depends on whose particular taste buds you're appealing.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of shows, you mentioned this guest stars kind of Seinfeld was kind of a launch pad for them, and you had that one scene with Bob Odenkirk, if you remember.
Yes, Bob.
Shouldn't he elevate his legs? I mean, that's always what I remember from that episode.
Exactly. It's like, if you're a doctor, why aren't you doing something? And Bob and I, this is so funny because Bob and I not only did that little brief interstitial scene together, but we ended up auditioning for commercials together, and we kind of came up through the ranks together. And I had gone to Austin. I was living in Dallas doing Ann Ewing. I was playing Ann Ewing for the new reboot of the series Dallas. And so I went down to Austin for the TV festival at the time. And by that time, he was on Breaking Bad. And I was old friends with Bryan Cranston, not from Seinfeld, but from life. I mean, he had been my son's baseball coach and had gone on, and we had done Malcolm in the Middle. I had done a guest on that. He and I did J.C. Penney's commercials, a Christmas commercial where he played this bad Santa. And we just had a long history where we really, really appreciated and adored each other. So when I saw Bob, I was like, oh, hey, it's you. Hi, and we ended up sitting next to each other. And Giancarlo Esposito was doing a reading of a new play that the creator of Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad was doing a reading of. And so it's so nice, I think, as actors coming up through the ranks to see everybody kind of hit their successes and just cheer each other on. I think people think this industry is so cutthroat and people are jealous. I'm always so thrilled when someone succeeds because it means, by the grace of God, there go I. My feeling is there's enough for everybody. And I was really happy to see someone as nice as Bob have the success that he's having.
For sure. And I think that's the spirit of Seinfeld. And I think that's why the show is so great, is that they let guest stars shine, right? Like, that's why we're talking to you. I mean, people remember you. So we're always curious when we talk to guest stars. Were you, because you came in season 7, were you a big fan of the show? Were you watching it like consistently?
Oh yeah.
What are some of your favorite episodes that you always kind of leaned in towards or would never turn off when it
well, there's the classic soup Nazi,
right.
Soup for you. There's the man hands. That one was always, it's just like the particular, the one where Jason is trying to eat and have sex at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah. All the stuff with the parents were hysterical. I think, just turning it on and watching for a second, just watching Michael Richards enter a room was a lesson, of how to make an entrance. I mean, that character, nobody else could play it like he did. I mean, he was and he would practice it. Like backstage before we would make an entrance, I'd be seeing him like do his thing and, almost bump into walls. And, just he was so committed to making it funny and making it his. So those were just a few of the episodes that I remember, but it was obviously water cooler. I mean, everybody talked about it.
Yeah. Pinnacle. I mean, obviously,
Putty,
it's speaking of that, and it was also ahead of its time. I don't know if you know this, but wearing a bra as a top is now like a new fashion trend. Like it's all over the place, and we're seeing like articles written about it. Every time I turn the TV on, like these are the young the hip girls are wearing. I mean, you set the entire trend. This is 30 years ago. It's incredible how it just comes full circle.
Yeah. It goes back to what goes around comes around. It just everything resurges in social media as well as life. You just see these cycles returning. I can't take credit for it because I didn't create it, but yeah, it's interesting to see girls wearing bras as tops now, and nobody seems to mind. It's interesting.
And who knew Larry David would set that trend? Look at that.
Larry knew.
Larry knew.
Yeah.
I mean, you've worked on I mean, from Cheers, obviously, it's all the work with Desperate Housewives, obviously Seinfeld, right? I mean, that voice, Mary Alice, Spaceballs. You mentioned the Superman show. I mean, you've done so much, but and Seinfeld's been 26, 25 years now. Is that still what you're most recognized for these days still? Or
it depends. It depends on what kind of fan they are. So if they're a sci-fi fan, it's usually Star Trek, The 100, Spaceballs, or Starship Troopers. So it's all of those. If you're a comedy fan, it's obviously Seinfeld. Late night soap, it's usually Dallas or Desperate Housewives. Sometimes it's so funny. I'm getting my car repaired right now. I had a little bit of a fender bender and I had to do some body work. And I'm on the phone with the auto body guy. And he goes, your car's going to be done really soon. I'm so sorry for the delay, but it's really nice to talk to you. He said, I don't know if you know this, but you have a really soothing voice. And I went, yeah, I've heard that once or twice. So, but it's so funny because sometimes when I'm on the phone with like a MasterCard or one of those things, I have to be careful because I know that they can recognize my voice. I have to be careful to be really nice. But yeah, it just depends on what kind of fan you are. If I'm in New York, absolutely, it's Seinfeld. I've had trucks, fire trucks go by on the street and people yell Sue Ellen at me. So
up in traffic
New Yorkers
still,
have a particular fondness for Seinfeld in their hearts. Yeah.
Still stopping traffic. Before we were chatting about that Spaceballs, you mentioned you might have a story for us. We're interested in kind of hearing that background there.
Oh, yeah. I've got a couple of things coming up, though, too. I want your
for sure.
But we'll talk about that at the end. But the Spaceballs was really funny because it was the first thing I ever did. And, I was a huge Mel Brooks fan. I just thought he was a genius. And so to be able to have him be my very first director was kind of extraordinary. And my son was in 5th grade. And, I don't bring my work home. I try to keep the two things separate. And he came home one day incredulous. And he goes, Mom. I'm like, what? He goes, were you in Spaceballs? And I'm like, because I'd never let him see it. And I said, yeah. He goes, half the boys in my 5th grade class are in love with you. I was like, I'm sorry, sweetheart. I know that's embarrassing. I'm really sorry. And what's funny is my husband now remembers me as Nurse Gretchen, and it's embarrassing. But I ran into Mel Brooks years and years later. I was out to lunch with my agent in Beverly Hills, and I rarely go out in Beverly Hills. So this was an occasion for me. And but she goes out all the time. And we were sitting there and she goes, oh, Brenda, look at that. That's Mel Brooks. And I said, oh, do you want to meet him? She goes, do you know him? I'm like, bro, you're my agent of several decades. How do you not know that I know Mel Brooks? I said, come on. So I leaned down and he's in this, group of men writers, just the who's who of writers in Hollywood. And I said, Mr. Brooks, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I just want to say thank you because you gave me my first job in this industry. And I've had such a beautiful career and I'm so grateful to you. And I just want to say thank you. And he looks at me and he goes, oh, who are you? And I said, I'm Brenda Strong. I played Nurse Gretchen in Spaceballs. And he goes, oh, yeah, you were good. And I just love that. I love that.
Oh, that is fantastic. I'll never forget seeing that movie, Pro River, New York. I sat on the floor because it was sold out. So
wow.
What a film. Yeah.
And he took me to lunch when we were filming with his wife, who I remember growing up wanting to be in The Graduate. And I was like, pinch me. What am I doing here? I mean, this is amazing. So it's interesting how, these things kind of come full circle around.
That is amazing. I mean, right? A girl from Oregon, like all of a sudden having lunch with Mel Brooks and Larry David. I mean,
yeah,
a blessed life for sure. So, yeah, Brenda, tell us a little bit about what you're up to now, what projects you're working on. I mean, the resume continues to grow, I see, but we'd love to hear kind of what you're up to these days.
Well, aside from directing, which I started doing, Number 3 Normandy Lane that you mentioned at the beginning was my short film directorial debut. And that kind of that springboarded me into directing 2 of the episodes for 13 Reasons Why in season 4 was the hall shooter, the school shooter episode and the party episode. And those were huge kind of tentpole episodes. I was really thrilled to be able to do that. And during COVID, like you guys, I got creative. I wrote a novel that my husband and I are turning into a series. It will be one of several books that will turn into hopefully one of several seasons of television. We'll tell you more about that when it finally finds its home. But most recently, last year I worked on something called 61st Street that's on AMC. With Courtney B. Vance, and I play kind of a badass prosecutor opposite his district attorney. And that was really fun to shoot in Chicago and to shoot kind of a really important social justice piece. And the writer of that is also the writer of Your Honor, which is the show that Bryan Cranston is doing the 2nd season of right now. So this is how these things get connected. And then the last thing that I just finished this summer was a new show for Hulu that Kerry Washington is producing under her banner Simpson Street, and it's called Unprisoned. And I play her stepmother, who raised her from like 8 to 18, and Delroy Lindo's lady, so his wife at that time. And it's a comedy and explores the nature of relationships and family and all of that good stuff. And I had a really good time with that character, much more along the lines of a Sue Ellen Mischke. This woman is really ballsy and very, very comfortable with her body and doesn't mind making people uncomfortable. So it was really, really fun to play her. Yeah.
So you weren't Jackie Childs in 61st Street. You were the opposite, a tough lawyer.
Yeah, I was a really tough lawyer, Jackie Childs.
And it's funny, I was looking up some more. Your current husband, I think, was he in The Brave?
Yeah, yeah.
So also in that show was Sean Taub, who was Pinter in The Betrayal.
Yes.
So it's, to your point, it's just crazy how there's so many of these connections.
Yeah, you stay in this business long enough, you pretty much end up having 6 degrees with everybody, or 2 for some.
That's great, and I think just your passion for the business and your grace is just it really shines. I mean, I think that probably goes back to your yoga days and just your willingness to give, I think, is incredible. So we couldn't be more happy that you joined us tonight.
I'm just glad people still want to watch. I mean, quite honestly, that for me, longevity. I remember as a young actress seeing Jessica Tandy accept the Academy Award for Driving Miss Daisy at 80 some years old. And I was in my 20s at the time, and I went, that's who I want to be. Like, I want that kind of longevity. I want that kind of career. And, that means sometimes it has ebbs and flows, and you just kind of have to have a really good life so that in the in-between times when nobody really is interested in seeing you, you don't give up. It's really important to have an interesting life to bring to all of these different people that you inhabit. So that's what I try to tell my son, because he's an actor now.
Oh, great.
That little boy that I was.
Is he a Seinfeld fan? Did he have the same reaction to Seinfeld as Spaceballs?
Binge watched it.
Nice.
He binge watched it. He loved it. Yeah. And he remembers hearing stories about me at lunch and feeding him and then going back to work. So he feels very
great.
Good in the show. Yeah.
That is fantastic. Well, Brenda, thanks so much. We can't thank you again.
Thank you guys. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, looking forward to the new Hulu show and everything else. Can't wait to see it.
Thanks, guys.
This was great.
All right. Be well.